Welcome to our Thursday evening program. I hesitate to say programs, but I am trying to work on more. My name is Doreen Esau. I work here at Showalter Villa in Life Enrichment. And it is good to see such a turnout. I was not sure what to expect tonight, getting back into the Thursday evening programs. There are two set in April. The first one is April 6th. Is that a Thursday? Whatever the first Thursday is in April. The chaplains are, April 6th. The chaplains will be putting on a Monday, Thursday program. And then the 20th, Father Andrew something, I'm sorry, I don't have a last name, his trip through the Holy Lands will be presented. But again, I'll get them out in the loop and just try to keep growing this program. So that also brings me, if you have a program that you would like to present, or music, or anything that you think the community and our residents would enjoy, please talk to me. So I'm pretty new at this, but I'm pretty excited about doing it. So, Weldon and Florence Schloniger, they live at Kidron, Bethel, and they have been to this beautiful coastland. I'm just not even going to say it. And they served in the Mennonite Central Committee from 1969 to 1971 as elementary teachers. And they have fallen in love with the country up there. They have photos. And so I'm going to turn it over to Weldon. Thank you so much for being here.
I love to talk about Newfoundland. That's how you say it. And glad for this opportunity to share with you. I call this presentation 10,900 miles of coastline. And so you have to wonder, how can a province of Newfoundland and Labrador have 10,900 miles of coastline? That's a lot of miles. Well, the reason it can have that many miles of coastline is because the coastline looks like this, or like this, or like this, or like that. Beautiful coastline. I'm going to give you a tiny, tiny sample of that 10,900 miles of coastline. A little deep, deep history. To understand Newfoundland's place in history, you need to go back 100,000 years ago. And by the way, all the numbers on this map are very, very round. Okay, scholars disagree, but these are nice round numbers. You need to go back to 100,000 years ago when human beings first began migrating north out of Africa. And as they came out of Africa, some turned left or west. And over the next 60,000 years, they filled out what we know as Europe. Some, as they came out of Africa, turned right or east. And for the next 90,000 years, they filled out Asia, Australia, eventually went over the land bridge to North America and then to South America. And those who went east all the way across North America eventually found their way to the island that we call Newfoundland. That's not a very good picture. Okay. Some of those who went west became what we call the Norsemen, or the Vikings. And their boats were good enough to eventually reach, I don't want to be on there. Doreen?
Yes.
I don't want to be on there.
I just wanted to let our residents watching see who you were.
Okay. All right, there we go. Some of the human beings who went west became the Norsemen, and their boats were good enough to reach first Iceland, where they established communities, and then they went to Greenland, where they established communities. And about 1000 AD, they ventured even further west and landed on the very tip of the northern peninsula of what we now call Newfoundland, at a place we call L'Anse-aux-Meadows. That red arrow shows where they landed. Now, when they arrived, they encountered people who were already living there. The Vikings called them Skraelings, which means barbarians. Neither of the two groups were aware of the awesome significance of that meeting. That encounter was the first time in 100,000 years that the humans who went west encountered the humans who went east. And they met for the first time there on the tip of Newfoundland. The place where this encounter happened over 1,000 years ago is at L'Anse-aux-Meadows, and at that location there is this sculpture. The sculpture is called The Meeting of Two Worlds, and it commemorates the meeting of those humans who went west and those who went east and finally came together right at this spot. This is a Google Earth image, and in the light green area where the red arrows are pointing, you can see the outlines of the Viking settlement 1,000 years ago. The Vikings only stayed here a few years, but they left plenty of evidence behind. Sod houses, like the Vikings would have built, have been reconstructed on the site with blocks of peat forming the walls. And here is a, quote, Viking man doing some boat repair. They have people there all the time for tourists, people pretending to be Vikings, and they tell stories. For the next 500 years after the Vikings, no Europeans came back to North America, not until John Cabot landed at Bonavista in 1497. Now, I know Columbus made a voyage in 1492, 5 years earlier, but never once did Columbus set foot on the mainland of North America. This is you can't see it too well, but this is a Google Earth image of Bonavista where John Cabot landed. John Cabot was sailing for England, but he was actually Italian. His name was Giovanni Caboto. When Cabot returned to England to report on his trip, he reported to King Henry VII what he had found, and the king was all excited, and he declared this a newfound land, and the name stuck. Cabot's biggest discovery in 1497 was a superb fishing area just southeast of the island of Newfoundland, which became known later as the Grand Banks. So off of Newfoundland's southeast coast is this huge underwater plateau where the average depth, it's in the light blue part, the average depth of that whole area is only 180 feet. It's also where the warm Gulf Stream from the southwest meets the cold Labrador Current coming down from the north. And the shallow water and the mixture of the warm and cold water makes it an ideal habitat for fish, especially for cod. Here's a more precise map of the water depths around Newfoundland. The waters are fairly shallow all around the island, and so that the entire area was just a perfect spot for fishing. So in the coming centuries, after John Cabot discovered this spot, Ships from all kinds of European countries sailed to Newfoundland. They loaded up with fish, and they sailed home to England, France, Portugal, Spain. And some fishermen eventually, particularly the English and the French during the 17th century, said, why sail all the way back to Europe? Let's just stay here over the winter. And they established communities all around the 10,900 miles of coastline. And this is a 19th century photo of cod drying in the sunshine. All those things are cod. Throughout 2 whole centuries, the 19th century and the 20th century, Newfoundland was the most important fishing site in the entire world. The supply seemed inexhaustible. And old sea captains made this claim. It's a slight exaggeration. They said the cod were so thick that you could jump off the ship and walk across the water on the backs of the cod. That's a slight exaggeration, but not by all that much. During these centuries that the Europeans were coming to Newfoundland and fishing, the indigenous people of Newfoundland were the Beothiks. And this is a photo of the last remaining Beothik. Her name was Shauna Dithet. She died in 1829. And as it always seems to happen, when those who turned left out of Africa encountered those who turned right, the ones who turned right were wiped out. The Beothuk were forced to move, they got European diseases, they were hunted down as if they were wild animals, and they were extinguished. Now here's a chart showing the tons of cod. Cod, when Newfoundlanders say fish, they mean cod. If it's halibut, they'll call it halibut. If it's herring, they'll call it herring. But when they say fish, they mean cod. This is the tons of cod harvested. And you'll notice there's a huge spike in the 60s and 70s. That's why Florence and I were there. I still remember the huge ships from Portugal. We called them the Portugal White Fleet, anchored in St. John's Harbor. Ships from Russia and Portugal and France and everywhere were just fishing like crazy. The biggest reason for the spike in cod production, though, was fishing technology. They developed drag nets, dragged by huge ships along the bottom of the ocean, and they caught everything that was there. They're very efficient, and they also destroyed the habitat for the cod. In 1992, you can see the big drop there, the cod catch was at 1% of what it used to be. And so the Canadian government imposed an immediate and complete cod moratorium. And overnight, literally overnight, 37,000 fishermen and fish plant workers lost their jobs and had no source of income. The moratorium was supposed to last a couple years. It's still in place today. There is a limited cod season now in Newfoundland. There are some cod coming back. And if you go to Newfoundland during the summer and go to a restaurant, you can always order a fresh cod dinner, which is delicious. But the old days will never return. One positive note about this, Newfoundland fishermen were resourceful, and they turned from cod to snow crab and shrimp and lobster, which today is equal in value to the cod that they replaced. Also in the Grand Banks today is oil. It was discovered there in 1979. That's the Hibernia oil platform. It is the biggest platform by weight in the world. And so oil is today an important part of the Newfoundland economy. When I had to teach 7th grade, that first year in Newfoundland, I had to teach Canadian history and Canadian geography, about which I knew nothing. But I had a book, and I stayed one day ahead of the kids, because I had to learn this stuff myself. After some periods of independence and also some periods of British rule, it was very complicated, Newfoundland voted by a very small margin in 1949 to join Canada. Or as Newfoundlanders say, that's when Canada decided to join us. It is one province in two very distinct and different parts. Labrador is the larger yellow area there. It's part of the mainland by Quebec. And then there's the island of Newfoundland, but that is one province. The entire population of the province is 521,000. Not that many people. And only 6% of that number live in Labrador. And 2 out of every 5 Newfoundlanders live in that little red circle down at the bottom, which is the city of St. John's. Maybe you can't see it says St. John's, but you can see the little red circle. 40% of all Newfoundlanders live there. And over half of all Newfoundlanders live in the green circle, which is the Avalon Peninsula. This is a map of the Appalachians. You're acquainted with the Appalachian mountain range from our country, but if you keep going north, you can see that the west coast of Newfoundland is also part of the Appalachian range. And if you drive in that area, it sort of looks like the Appalachian Mountains we know here. Pronunciation. Everyone here gets it wrong. It's not Newfoundland, it's a land, folks. It rhymes with understand. I'd like you to say that with me. Understand Newfoundland. Understand Newfoundland. It's a land, no lund, okay? Newfoundland. You can also put the emphasis on the new, as long as you say land. Newfoundland. It's a land, not a lund. Okay, got that straight. Most of the Newfoundlanders today are descended from fishing families from southeast Ireland and southwest England. They're Irish communities, they're English communities, and that's basically where they came from. There are a few French communities. France used to have a large presence there, no longer does. And in Labrador, there are some indigenous communities. MCC was active in Labrador for a long time after they left Newfoundland. Newfoundlanders speak English, sort of. Whole books are written on the Newfoundland language. There's a Newfoundland dictionary that's yay thick. It's English, but they have their own words, they have their own phrases, their own vocabulary, their own pronunciation, and when we first got there, we couldn't understand what they were saying. So a man says, "I finds me elbow." That means my elbow hurts. Okay? First of all, they don't have the word hurt. Anything's wrong, you find it. I finds me Ed. You find something, okay? No one in Newfoundland has the word my. It's always me. That's a old English thing, especially lower class English. And also something that's sort of a Cockney English. If a word starts with an H, they drop the H. If it starts with a vowel, they add an H. So this is me elbow. This is me Ed. I go to hospital to have a operation. Okay? And they talk fast. They also have no TH sound. That's also sort of a lower class English thing. So if you're teaching math and you write that fraction down there at the bottom on the blackboard and ask somebody to pronounce it with a T sound instead of a TH sound, say that to yourself. It's a tree and a turd. Yeah. Newfoundlanders have a good sense of humor. This is a taxi driver who doesn't have the TH sound. He knows nobody else has the TH sound either. So he advertises his taxi service, the phone number, with You can see his building back there with the 4 trees, and on his taxi there are the 4 trees. So his number is 695 tree, 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 tree. Everybody knows what that is. Okay, a little tutorial about icebergs. You're going to see some iceberg photos. Icebergs break off the west coast of Greenland, almost all of them do, and they go north. That's where the current goes in the west coast of Greenland. They eventually make a left turn and come south past Baffin Island, south past Labrador, and then down toward the island of Newfoundland, which is the world's best place to see icebergs. And they eventually melt in June or July. But that's the path. It's a 2 or 3 year journey. Icebergs are fresh water. They're the purest fresh water on Earth. The ice is 10,000 years old. 90% of icebergs, just like the ice cube in your glass, is 90%, almost 90% underwater. That's one iceberg. That's not 3 icebergs. It's all connected under the water. They come in all shapes, they come in all sizes. And by the time they get to Newfoundland, they're all melting. But it's quite an experience. Some years, there are icebergs everywhere, like this. Some years, there are just a few icebergs. Once in a while, there are none. So if you're a tourist, good luck. I hope you get there in a year where there are lots of icebergs. Sometimes icebergs founder. They're always melting. They melt from beneath because of the ocean water, and they melt from the top because of the sun. And so their center of gravity is always changing. They're always melting and cracking and turning. That's a big one, splashing. This is a video I took of a very small iceberg. It's about the size of I'd say the size of a pickup truck. And that's what happens to all icebergs, even ones twice as big as this building. Eventually they founder, they crack, they splash, and eventually they disappear. Florence and I have been woken up at night when we were in a place where there were a lot of big icebergs out in the bay, and suddenly we hear thunder. It wasn't thunder, it was a huge iceberg cracking. Very exciting. You all know about one iceberg. On April 15, 1912, it happened to be sitting in the path of the Titanic. And that particular iceberg probably had the same 2 or 3 year journey as any other iceberg. It was rather early in the iceberg season, but there it was. I'm going to start a tour around the 10,900 miles of coastline and just give you a little bit of a sampler of some of the highlights using my photographs. All the photographs from the next section are from that circle, little red circle area up on the tip of the northern peninsula. So all these photographs come from there. There's another iceberg, and another one. We took a 3-hour boat ride out to see that one. Both got very seasick. It's rather spectacular when you can get close to them. That little piece of ice, little pieces of icebergs are called bergy bits. And again, this is the purest fresh water on Earth. That's Bonnie Crable from North Newton touching the purest fresh water on Earth. This is from a place called Burnt Cape. The iceberg isn't very spectacular, but 20 miles across the water, you can see the coast of Labrador. From this area, Labrador is 10 to 20 miles distant, so it's not that far away, but Florence and I have never been there. The biggest town in this area is St. Anthony. This is St. Anthony Harbor early in the morning with beautiful colors along the rocky border of the harbor. This is the deck behind one of our favorite bed and breakfasts in St. Anthony in the morning. How could you not want to stay there? Newfoundlanders have always burned wood. Many places you still burn firewood. There's a nice stack of firewood. Nobody ever touches anybody else's pile of firewood. There are piles of firewood along the highway. There's no security, but you don't touch it. If you touched anybody else's firewood, you would be a pariah in your community and not welcome, and so nobody does it. It's just sitting there. That's an old-fashioned sled, probably still in use for hauling the firewood around in the winter. They always used horses. Today they might use snowmobiles, but there's an old-fashioned shed, iceberg in the background. Every summer, the humpback whales show up. There's some other kinds of whales too, but the humpbacks are the most exciting. They show up because they're little fish called capelin that by the millions, maybe the billions, come closer to the shore in order to spawn. And the humpback whales love capelin, and they fill their mouths with them. I mean, the water is full of capelin, and so they come there to feed, and the whales follow them. Humpback whale. Certain places, you can see trees that look like the one on the right, where there are branches on one side and no branches on the other side. We call that a flag tree. That reveals the direction of the prevailing wind, which is almost always from the same direction here. This used to be our favorite bed and breakfast in Newfoundland until sadly it closed down. The owner got too old, but it shows what kind of a beautiful place it is. If you want to build in most places in Newfoundland, again, this is all on that northern tip of the northern peninsula, you generally can't go down because it's almost always rock. So you go up. You build on poles, and that's how you do it. There's a little island up there called Carpoon Island, and you have to take a boat to go over to Carpoon Island. And that's a Zodiac boat, and to the right there is Florence's brother Ken, some of you know him, getting ready to get on the Zodiac to go over to Carpoon Island. So if you want to go to Carpoon Island, you need to be prepared for something like this. That's Ken hanging desperately onto the boat so he doesn't fall in the water. So if you're not up to this kind of a trip, you might not want to go there, but yeah, it's exciting. And this is the destination. This is the Lighthouse Bed and Breakfast on Carpoon Island. Like almost all lighthouses in Newfoundland today, it's not a lighthouse anymore. The lighthouse keeper's family used to live there. It used to be in Newfoundland towns that the highest position you could have was the lighthouse keeper. That's gone because of technology. So these are really the only buildings on the island. It is a lovely, lovely bed and breakfast, completely isolated. Carpoon Island is this otherworldly place with rocks and pools and paths. It's just, oh, there's some baby foxes we saw one morning on Carpoon Island. Yeah, there's some wildlife there. We didn't do this, but you can rent that bed, which hangs out over the cliff, and it's quite a ways down to the ocean below. It's securely fastened, so you don't need to worry about it falling down the cliff during the night. We didn't do that, but people do. So, yeah, I thought that was interesting. This is a large sort of tabular iceberg on Carpoon Island. This is a place called Cape Onion, which we just really fell in love with. Again, this is the northern tip of the northern peninsula. Don't skip it if you ever go there. Moving down south a little bit to Flowers Cove, MCC workers have often, they've been teachers, maybe nurses at Flowers Cove. For tourists, probably the main thing you do at Flowers Cove is find the thrombolites. There's a big sign. Well, what's a thrombolite? Well, it's a fossilized, I mean, these are rocks. It's a fossilized remnants of colonies of ancient bacteria and algae about 650 million years old. That's old. There are some North Newton residents standing on thrombolites. We've done several tours in Newfoundland, taking friends along with us. Going further south, we're continuing our sampler tour to Grossmore National Park, probably, well, certainly one of the most beautiful areas in Newfoundland. As you go along the highway, you come to the Arches along the west coast of the Great Northern Peninsula. It's a great place to get out and explore and take photographs. And you hope when you're under the arch that it doesn't collapse while you're there. You can take a boat tour down Western Brook Pond. If you've seen the fjords of Norway, it might look something like this. It is just a gorgeous area. That falls is called Pissingmere Falls. That's what they call it. Yeah, maybe you can see why. It is just a really, really beautiful boat tour, beautiful area. Hikers like to hike in that area as well. This is a place called Green Point. It's a World Heritage Site. Geologists from all over the world know about this place. It is a world geological benchmark. You see the layers closest to the camera, and then the layers all the way along. And notice that they're vertical. Well, they started out, of course, horizontal. It was an ancient seabed, sedimentary layers. And over a long period of time, the seabed moved and was eventually thrust up to this position. And the layers that are closest to you are the oldest. They were on the bottom. And as you walk along the shoreline, every step you take is thousands and thousands and thousands of years. It is just an awesome, awesome experience. This is Grossmore Mountain. This is a Google Earth image. It is the second highest mountain in Newfoundland. The highest one is in Labrador, and I've never seen it. 2,644 feet. That's not very tall as mountains go, but that's what it looks like from the ocean. Grossmore means, let's see, large mountain standing alone. That's what Grossmore means. This is a 1983 photo of Florence with our sons Matt and Tim. A highlight of that trip was climbing Grossmore Mountain on a gorgeous day. We could see forever there. It was very difficult. We struggled to make it to the top, but we did. Ate our lunch there. And it's probably our #1 family memory when we climbed Grossmore. It was just a great day. Nearby, you can go to a marine research station and see the famous blue lobster. That's unusual. I looked down over the wharf one day, and down on the water right by the surface were jellyfish. That is a lion's mane jellyfish. There are moose. This is the only photo I'm going to show you that I didn't take. Took Jim and Noah Stuckey with us one year, and Jim is a really good portrait photographer, as you know. And this is his portrait of a moose. It was just standing beside the road. And best portrait he ever took, I think. Usually he does people. Pine grosbeak eating dandelions. This is interesting. I'm sorry you can't see the words on the bottom, but I'll try to explain everything. Most of Newfoundland is green. And the town that you see here on the edge of the water is a little town called Woody Point. And behind Woody Point it's green until you get to the area that isn't green, where nothing is growing. That is called the tablelands. Now, a little geology for us here. 25 miles below us right now, more or less, is the Earth's mantle. It's a long way down. You never see the Earth's mantle unless you come here. Here, the Earth's mantle has been thrust to the surface. And it's only one of only 2 places on Earth where you can walk on the Earth's mantle. The rock is called peridotite. It turns orange as the iron within it oxidizes. And it's the closest thing we have on Earth to the surface of Mars, which is why NASA has occasionally brought Mars equipment here for testing. This is what it's like in the tablelands when you are hiking. It is very special, sort of otherworldly, awesome, unique experience. Going now to the Port-au-Port Peninsula, it's that little part that sticks out. This is the most French part of Newfoundland. It has some beautiful cliffs around the peninsula and some unusual flowers. And if you go to the local restaurant for some tea, if you listen very carefully, you will hear conversations around you in French. It's probably the only place in Newfoundland where that would happen. Moving on to the little town of Burgeo on the south coast of Newfoundland. The south coast is mainly not accessible except by boat, but there is a highway to Burgeo. And one of the reasons I like Burgeo isn't so much because of the town, which is way over there in the right part of the map, but you notice these real light-colored beach areas. That's sand. Beautiful white, well, maybe not white, but light-colored, clean, gorgeous sand. It goes for miles like that. If you're walking on one of those beaches, you're likely to be the only person there. It is just a marvelous experience. Moving on to Cape St. Mary's. Cape St. Mary's Ecological Reserve. All the little white dots you see there are birds, northern gannets that are nesting there. They nest there for months. They raise their young, and then they watch their youngsters make their first flight from those cliffs. Imagine being a baby bird. You know, baby birds will fly out of a tree, and it's 15, 20 feet. These baby birds, their first flight is to jump off that cliff. And most of them make it. Not all of them. There the gannets nesting. You can walk very close to them. The ranger told us that each pair of gannets, and they stay together as a couple, each pair of gannets nests in the same spot on the same rock every year. And we've been back here several times. I wish I would have taken note which birds are where, and you could name them, and they'd be back the next year. This is where you stand or sit to watch the gannets. I call this my happy place. If I could go anywhere in the world and just sit, I'd go here. It's just a lovely spot. This is sort of what it's like when you're at Cape St. Mary's. I don't do lots of videos, but I do have a few that just sort of give you a feel. These are all northern gannets. Did you hear the foghorn? It was foggy that morning. Yeah. Oops. Go back. There's Mr. Gannet bringing seaweed for the nest. There's Mrs. Gannet sitting on the nest. And I've circled in green the baby gannets. They're fuzzier and smaller than their parents. These are not ready to take that first flight yet, but those are the little ones. So the gannets are here for months, and this is the only time in the year that they're on land. They spend the rest of their lives on the water, but they spend quite a few months here. Gannets are gorgeous and graceful birds. That one was flying right at me. There are also some other birds there on the left. The little gray and white one is the kittiwake, and the ones with the black backs are the murres. The local people call them turs, and those are game birds. Newfoundland men go out in the boat and they go tur hunting. If you can take your eyes off the birds and look down at your feet, you'll see irises growing wild everywhere by the thousands, as they do all over Newfoundland. It's a sunset, Cape St. Mary's. That's a sunset nearby. That's exactly what it looked like. You could probably tell this area is one of my favorites. Moving now to Mistaken Point. It's a very southern part of the Avalon Peninsula there. This is a UNESCO World Heritage Site. It is a place where you can only visit if you're led by a ranger, and there's some very old fossils here. These are the oldest multicellular life fossils found anywhere on Earth. So these are creatures that no longer exist, but they were there. You have to wear little footies so that you don't damage the rock. You have to take your shoes off. You might recognize Dwight Craybill there on the right. There's some of the fossils. Sometimes it's very quiet and beautiful at Mistaken Point. This time the sea was quite exciting. On the hike out to Mistaken Point, I looked down and there's the sundew plant. It's carnivorous. It has glue on the ends of its little fingers, and insects get on that and they can't get away. Moving now to Cape Spear, which is the easternmost point in North America. That is the lighthouse, the current lighthouse at Cape Spear. When you are here, you are 1/3 of the way to Europe from the east coast of the United States. The Great Circle Route takes you right over Newfoundland. So you're 1/3 of the way to Europe here. This is the old lighthouse at Cape Spear. You could tour it. It's where the lighthouse keeper's family used to live. And because of its location, the waves are always great at Cape Spear. They say don't go down on the rocks, which is good advice because a big wave could come and take you away. Moving now to the capital city of St. John's. Remember I said 40% of all Newfoundlanders live in the St. John's metropolitan area. This is a Google Earth image that explains why St. John's exists. You see the Narrows there between some hills, and then behind that is one of the best natural harbors anywhere on Earth. This is a ship coming through the Narrows at St. John's. This particular ship was specifically built to service the Hibernia oil platform almost 200 miles away. This is the city of St. John's from Signal Hill, where all tourists are required to go. And on top of Signal Hill is the Cabot Tower. It's from this location that Marconi in 1901 sent the first transatlantic wireless message. It was the letter S, sent by Morse code from England. But that's the first time that had happened. In 1892, the entire city of St. John's burned to the ground. Almost everything was wood. That's what it looked like after the 1892 fire. This is what it looks like today. Everything was built since then. You'll notice the bright colors. Newfoundlanders have always liked brightly colored wooden houses. And you can go up and down the streets of old St. John's and look at the jelly bean houses. That's what they call them. Jelly bean because of all the different colors. The streets are very steep. The Basilica of St. John the Baptist is the only building that survived the 1892 fire. It is huge. It is beautiful. Worth spending some time there. Moving on to the town of Trinity. Like I said, this is a very quick sampler. This is the town of Trinity, very picturesque. The harbor, or the town of Trinity, was used as a fishing harbor as early as the 1500s, very, very, very early. Today, this village lives, I think, 100% by tourism. It is the tourist town, and it's gorgeous. In Trinity, all the houses are wood. No vinyl siding allowed. All the houses are wood, and everything is brightly painted. And it's just a gorgeous place. This is a typical garden in Newfoundland. This is in Trinity. All Newfoundland gardens are raised beds. All of them. and they mainly grow root vegetables, some cabbages in the back. You see some rhubarb. It's a fairly short growing season, but if you go to a local store and they have local produce, they have the biggest turnips you have ever seen and the biggest cabbages you have ever seen. It's just amazing. This is the cemetery of the Anglican Church in Trinity, St. Paul's Anglican Church. Buried in this cemetery is an Englishman named John Clinch. John Clinch was a personal friend of Edward Jenner. He's the guy who developed the first smallpox vaccine back in England, and he knew Jenner. So he brought some vaccine in the ship across the Atlantic. He brought it here to Trinity, and it was here in Trinity, right here, that the first smallpox vaccine was administered in North America. It started right here. Up above the town of Trinity are lupins. They go wild all over Newfoundland in the summer. We think they're gorgeous. Locals think they're a pest because they just spread everywhere, but I think they're gorgeous. Moving out to Bonavista, this is where John Cabot landed in 1497. This is the old lighthouse. This is becoming a theme. It's no longer a lighthouse. This is where the lighthouse keeper used to live, and you take tours through the lighthouse. The current lighthouse is not a lighthouse. It's that tower in back of the lighthouse that has a little light on it that runs automatically by electricity. That's all you need. In the old lighthouse, this is the mechanism that turned the lights, the oil lamps. That's why you need a lighthouse keeper. These are oil lamps that the lighthouse keeper had to keep clean and lit as it rotated. So it was a very important full-time job. The rocks at Bonavista tell a long geological story, and I'm not a geologist and I can't tell you the story, but you have to wonder, how did that happen? The guy there at the top is Florence's brother-in-law, Milo Stauffer. He climbed everything he could find, and there he is. Interesting rocks at Bonavista. Also at Bonavista is a colony of puffins. The puffins are the provincial bird of Newfoundland. They don't live on rocks. They dig burrows in the ground or in the peat where they lay their eggs. And they're gorgeous birds, cute. They're about the size of a football and not very afraid of people. All those are puffins. Everything you see there is a puffin. The geology is interesting. The dungeons near Bonavista, a green bay. That's a really green bay. From our bed and breakfast in Bonavista, that's our view out our window of an iceberg. Lots of interesting places to eat by the sea. Oh, there's a fox that was hiding under a building. Now we're in the town of Elliston, which proclaims that it is the root cellar capital of the world. All towns in Newfoundland had root cellars. That's how you stored your vegetables. But they call themselves the root cellar capital of the world. Moving on to Musgrave Harbor, just a few photos from there. It's another place with miles of sandy beaches. You know, so much of Newfoundland is just rock, but there are these sandy beaches. Just fun to walk and explore. Moving to Fogo Island. We spent several weeks there this past summer. Here I'm standing on Brimstone Head. Now, Brimstone Head, let me move along here with my notes. Oh, by the way, it takes a 45-minute ferry ride to get to Fogo Island. It's not connected to the main island. According to the Flat Earth people, and the Flat Earth people have some roots here on Fogo Island. According to the Flat Earth people, this is one of the corners of the Earth, right here. And when you're standing there, you find it hard to argue with them. It feels like the end of the Earth. Some years there are not many icebergs. Some years, like the year we were here, there are icebergs everywhere. On Fogo Island, there are a lot of places with no trees, and you look around and say, where are the trees? Well, sometimes you have to look down. That's a tree. That's a creeping juniper. In this climate, that's the best it can do. They cater to tourists on Fogo Island. They're making more money every year on tourism. And they know tourists like to climb mountains, and they know some of us aren't very athletic. So they built steps all the way up. Beautifully built, solid, wooden steps. Yeah. You need to know what a fishing stage is. This is very important. It's a little shed built out over the water on stilts. And when you bring your fish in on the boat, you unload your fish into the stage, and that's where they're gutted, split, split open, prepared for drying, prepared for salting. It's where the fish are processed. And everybody had a fishing stage at one time or another. They're almost always red. Now that's not a fishing stage, but you notice the similarity in architecture? It's a very, very modern building. This is an artist studio. Fogo Island has worked hard to attract artists from all over the world. And they have 4 different artist studios. The architecture is inspired by the fishing stage, although they're all different. That's one. That's another one. That's another one. Modern buildings, but inspired by the fishing stage. We're in the town now of Joe Bat's Arm. They have wonderful place names in Newfoundland. Joe Bat's Arm. And in the foreground, you see a fishing stage. Notice the architecture. And in the background, that big white building has an architecture that's inspired by the fishing stage. That is the famous Fogo Island Inn. You can see the Fogo Island Inn on this picture. Now, if you want to stay in the Fogo Island Inn, the smallest cost per night is $2,875. That's for their worst room. For their best room, it's $5,575 per night, and there's a 3-night minimum. Rich people from all over the world come here, and they are always full. It wasn't built for us. We have not stayed there yet. Don't think we will. If you want to put up a telephone pole in Newfoundland, you're either on rock or you're in bog. Either way, you need something to prop up the telephone pole. You see this all over Newfoundland. A pile of rocks with a wooden frame around it, around the pole to hold it up. Newfoundland women love to hang out their clothes. They always have, and they still do, whatever they can. I surmise that this particular woman had some scientific background. Do you see the spectrum? That order was not accidental. Hiking trail on Fogo Island. It can be very windy, so they put some rocks on this bench to make sure it didn't blow away. Here's a lobster fisherman checking his lobster to see if it's big enough to keep. That's a sea urchin shell. Sea urchins live in the ocean. Here it's hundreds of yards away from the ocean. That's because a seagulls love sea urchins. A seagull picked it up, brought it here. They always take it somewhere else. They eat the meat of the sea urchin, and then they leave the shell where it is. So that's why this sea urchin shell is there. Every time I go to Newfoundland and look at the rocks, I say, please give me a geologist. Why is this? I can't tell you. This is a hiking trail on Fogo Island. If you're hiking in Newfoundland, 99% of the time you're either on rock or on packed peat, which is what this is. You never get your feet muddy. There's no clay. It's either rock or peat. This is the view. This is the top of that trail, part of the town of Fogo. Brimstone Head in the background, one of the corners of the earth. Going now to Change Islands, which is right next to Fogo Island. That's a little bit of the town of Change Islands from a long way away with a long lens. If you want to go someplace in Newfoundland which is most like it used to be, go to Change Islands. There's some fishing stages. If you want to bury somebody in Change Islands, most of it's rock. So you have to find a place where there's soil deep enough to bury someone. And down there in the bottom, there was enough soil to bury somebody. There's an old guy on Change Islands called Pete Porter. He has a little museum, and he has stuff. He has everything. And he tells you what everything is, and when he's done, he plays for you. Yeah, he knows his way around a squeeze box. Now we're going to Twillingate Island and New World Island. This is the end of our tour. This is where Florence and I lived for 2 years in this area. It's an area with thousands of islands. You can't see all the little ones here. Twillingate and New World Island are in Notre Dame Bay. And 54 years ago, MCC sent us here as elementary teachers. We lived in the town of Virgin Arm. Virgin Arm is in the yellow area, which is inside the red circle. That's where we lived for 2 years. We're going to start, though, with Twillingate Island. This is the town of Twillingate, population a little over 2,000. Very famous little town, tourist town. They call themselves the iceberg capital of the world. This is the lighthouse at Twillingate. It's still a working lighthouse, but there's the light. It's electric, it's small, the bulb is about that big, but it's bright, and the lenses do their work and send the light out for 20, 30 miles. Anybody know what that is? You don't want to be close to it when it's making its sound. That's a foghorn. If you're close to that when it goes, it'll shatter you. You just don't. It's my favorite cemetery in Newfoundland, the Anglican Cemetery in Twillingate. A lot of history there, just a beautiful spot. Part of the coastline of Twillingate, hiking trail. The provincial plant of Newfoundland is the pitcher plant. It swallows insects. It holds water. Insects fall down in the water. They drown. The plant eats them. Dandelions in Newfoundland are not weeds. They're beautiful wildflowers. They tend to be large, and they're gorgeous. This was the view from our living room window when we lived in Newfoundland in around 1970. The arm of Virgin Arm is that arm of water that comes into the town. That's how it got its name. This, again, is an old photograph of some children playing hockey on the ocean. They cleared away some snow, and they're playing hockey there. We talked to a man this summer on New World Island who said, we believe in global warming here because it used to be we could drive our cars over the ice in the winter from one shore to another. We don't do that anymore because there's not enough ice. The ice isn't thick enough. Sometimes it doesn't even freeze over. He said there's nobody in Newfoundland who doesn't believe that the earth is getting warmer. On the left is the little one-room school that I started in. I had 7th grade in there. To the right is Florence's. It was a 3-room school where she taught 1st grade, and behind her school is the 3-holer, where we think she got hepatitis. That handsome young skinny guy is me studying by lamplight. At first we had no electricity, so I got that experience of studying by lamplight. To the left is our library, to the right is our bank. This was 50 years ago. There's an outhouse that has an automatic flushing system. Tide comes in, tide goes out, tide comes in, tide goes out. Might be a little chilly, but there you go. This again is an old photo of a house in Virgin Arm. Notice the bright colors. Notice the front door that doesn't have any access. That was almost all the houses were that way. It's built up on stilts, and they didn't have enough money to finish the skirt around it, so the cold air is coming from underneath. There was a lot of obvious poverty at that time. This is probably my favorite photo of an old colorful house. You use whatever paint you have and you take it as far as you can, then you get the next bucket, even though it's a different color. And you'll notice the OSHA approved scaffolding. This was our house in Virgin Arm in 1970. We went back a few years later and there's the same house. All fixed up, white vinyl siding. Everybody had white vinyl siding. Everybody had white vinyl siding. So it's much less quaint now than it used to be, but much more practical. This is the town of Hairy Neck on New World Island. Every time I look at this, I think, why would you not want to live there? I mean, it's just gorgeous. If you want to travel to Newfoundland, you need to know there are no snakes, none. No skunks, no porcupines, no raccoons, no poison ivy, no poison oak, no ragweed, no ticks, no chiggers, no Lyme disease. And the people are very warm, hospitable and welcoming, and the possibilities are endless. That's the end of my presentation, unless you have some questions. Lauren.
What's in the center of Newfoundland?
In the center of Newfoundland is a huge, mostly empty area of bogs and lakes and ponds and hills and no people and moose and caribou and trees. Lumbering. Yeah, there's some lumbering. Yeah. Moose are not native to Newfoundland. They were introduced from Nova Scotia over 100 years ago, and they've taken off. And there are moose everywhere. There's signs along the highway, beware of the moose. You don't want to hit a moose. It's not like hitting a deer. Moose are big. Very dangerous. But all the men go moose hunting. They go out every year to get their moose. It's a big deal.
Except your car maybe could go under it.
Yeah, the legs are so long, your car might be able to go under it if you have a low car. But you don't want to hit a moose. Yeah. Other questions?
So is that public land then, or private land where nobody lives?
Probably technically they would call it Crown land, which is public land. Yeah. And you can go in there and get firewood. I think maybe you're designated a certain area and you cut firewood and you bring it out. But there are very few people inland. It's all about the coast. There are some towns inland like Gander, you may have heard of that, in relation to 9/11, Grand Falls, Deer Lake, but most of the towns are on the coast.
How did you heat your house?
What?
How did you heat your house?
How did we heat our house? That house was always heated with a wood stove, firewood. But when we got there, we were teaching all day, and it was cold, and we come back in the house after a day of teaching, and it was ice cold. We didn't like that. So we got an oil heater. We had an oil tank outside and got an oil line and put an oil heater in and kept that going, and that helped. But most people heated by wood. They had only gotten electricity about 5 years before we got there. They only had roads off the island about 5 years before we got there. So this was all new to them. Thank you. I'd be willing to give anyone Newfoundland travel tips if you ask.
Thank you so much, Weldon. That was a very good presentation. Again, thank you all for coming. The Showalter Singers will also be here next month, but I will make sure that gets in the loop. I'm not sure exactly which Thursday it is. So thank you all. Have a good evening.